Good morning and welcome to Rising. Happy Tuesday. We've got another great show for you today. Let's get right to it. The Federal Emergency Management Agency is apparently drowning. It's running low on money and on staff. This news comes as a once-in-a-century hurricane, Hurricane Milton, is barreling towards Tampa, Florida. Now, only 9% of FEMA personnel are available to respond to Hurricane Milton or other disasters that may arise. Still, the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas insisted that FEMA has sufficient resources. When asked about this report, here is what he told MSNBC's Jen Psaki on Monday night. Let's watch.
Everybody should rest confident that FEMA has the resources. We already have 900 personnel deployed, pre-positioned in Florida, people who were responding to Hurricane Helene, people who were responding previously to Hurricanes Idalia and Debbie. We are there. We have search and rescue teams. The Army Corps of Engineers are there. We are ready. We have the personnel. FEMA likes to say it is FEMA flexible. We can respond to multiple events at a single time.
I guess proof will be in the pudding. But for context, 1/4 of the agency's staff was available to jump into action and help at this point in the hurricane season for the last 5 years. In 2017, when the U.S. was pummeled with three devastating storms, Hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria, FEMA's reserves were at 19%. With this latest report, many questions linger about the agency's capability to respond through the end of the hurricane season, which will last until November 30th. The GAO, a nonpartisan congressional watchdog, released a report last year on FEMA's funding, concluding that it needed to improve hiring data and staffing gaps. GAO examined data from 2019 through 2022 and determined the agency needed to increase disaster workforce. The target had been set to boost disaster response personnel to 17, that is 670 by 2024, but that target has been pushed back to 2026. Meanwhile, Speaker Mike Johnson slammed the federal response to Hurricane Helene that killed over 200 people after devastating the southeast of the country. Here he is on Fox News Sunday with Shannon Bream. Take a look.
At the federal level, this has been a massive failure, and you could just ask the people there on the ground. I have been there. I was in Georgia. I was in Florida, where Hurricane Helene made landfall. They're on the coast, and then we'll be going to the hardest hit parts of North Carolina on Wednesday of this week. When you talk to the people who are directly affected, they will tell you that this has been an abject failure. FEMA has lost sight of its core mission, I think, in so many cases, and the administration has not shown that they were prepared for this.
Meanwhile, Johnson signaled he wouldn't call the House back to Washington as pressure grows for Congress to provide more funding for FEMA. Lawmakers are due back after the election. That may change, as President Biden said this morning. He is canceling his trip overseas so he can monitor the storm from the White House. There's so much to unpack here because there's the funding conversation that Mayorkas has stated and FEMA has stated that the funding won't run out, at least right now for this hurricane. Then there's the funding conversation about how the House didn't pass, it did pass, but many Republicans didn't want to vote in favor of expanding funding of FEMA in the spring, and there are more hurricanes happening. And then there's just the staffing issue where there's turnover because, surprise, disaster relief is very stressful, and there's been massive turnover with more storms that have been on record that they'd have to answer to. I even wrote down, this is wild, I didn't realize how many things were going on right now. Right now, you have FEMA dealing with, in the last 2 weeks, landslides in Vermont, tornadoes in Kansas, there was the storm Debbie in New York and Georgia, a watch fire in Arizona, 100 major other disasters, and only 35% of the positions are filled for that specific type of response. And in some of these situations, only one person is available for disaster survivor assistance out of the 1,201 that are supposed to be, that are on the payroll. 1 out of 50 out of the 50 staffers for Director of Disaster Operations are available as of Monday. 4 out of 2,579 are available for individual assistance. This is a crisis, man.
Yeah, I think it's impossible to argue that the disaster response has not been a disaster itself. I mean, I think a lot of this is government mismanaged because they have a massive budget, they have a massive staff now. Okay. People are going to say, well, they need even more funding and they need even more staff members. You know, that I have some skepticism there because it's like if you're not doing your job well enough, then you should be rewarded with tons of additional funding. I want to, like, how are these funds being spent? Is it possible to just get money to more plugged in on the ground local people to use better, to allocate better than the federal government does, because the federal government seems to have a massive response to localized problems that is not ideal. So I don't know exactly what the problem is here, but FEMA seems to be doing a bad job. Not being prepared in terms of the staffing is a major
burnout.
issue.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think part of it.
Do you understand that, like, oh, we're not doing a good job, increase our funding? Do you know what I mean?
It
seems it's unsatisfying.
But imagine you're a staffer that's normally used to dealing with maybe one hurricane a cycle, and obviously I'm not an expert on staffing procedures at FEMA and how many disasters one person in that department deals with on an annual basis. But it is very clear, as FEMA has stated, that there are more storms and there are more crises and disasters that they're dealing with. So you're getting burned out. Like, it would be like if we had to tape 4 shows in one day, we'd be burned out. We might be the best in the world, which I think we are, but there's a point where you're exhausted. And that is something I think FEMA, if they had more funding, they could potentially bring on more staffers, and those staffers, of course, allocate that money and go out there in the field and help with are on the ground to assist folks, whether it's just filling out the insurance forms or different, bureaucratic things that they have to do, or, handing out water or setting up locations where people can get food or charge their phones. It's wild what they do. I mean, I was in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria, I've told you before, and it is chaos. I mean, it is a totally chaotic thing, and you need to have people there who know how to navigate that chaos, who are trained in it. And some of these communities don't have anybody right now.
Well, FEMA itself is trying to claim that it's misinformation is what's making it so hard to address hurricane victims. And I'm like, I'm getting so tired of this concept. Misinformation is not a disease. It's not a natural disaster. It's a problem that we have always dealt with. The idea that suddenly we are overwhelmed with bad information in a way we never were before is just not factually accurate. It's not historically accurate. People are getting more informed over time. They're getting smarter over time. And people used to believe all sorts of kooky, crazy things. People believe the moon landing's fake. People believe... Right, I mean, and again, some of these kooky, crazy beliefs end up being correct, which is why you can't demonize the entire category of conspiracy theories or all that. I mean, we just interviewed today a guest who has expertise on the CIA's knowledge of what happened with the Kennedy assassination. Again, not saying that the craziest thing anybody thinks about the JFK assassination is correct, but you're right to ask questions, to think that the government knows more than they're letting on. That ends up having kernels of truth. So the idea, I just hate the idea of a government bureaucrat saying, oh, everything would be running perfectly. We'd be really well able to do our jobs if you all would just be like, less active on social media or something. Come on.
I think it has more to do with Donald Trump, who is an anomaly, at least for this era of politics, this modern era of politics. He goes out there and he says to his hundreds of millions of followers on X and Truth Social, and he does them at rallies, and then all of his most loyal fans, MAGA people, regurgitate these things on the ground, and they think they're real. I mean, I'm sure you've been to these rallies or reported on them before. The things that people say, it's wild. So if they think that FEMA's money is going to migrants, which has been proven and fact-checked multiple times as not true, and they did, by the way, do that under his administration.
Right, they used to do that.
Yes.
And then they changed where the funding.
So there's an argument
it's
to be
all,
made
it's all
that Donald
funding,
Trump
so it's
is not...
all, it's all coming from the same source, taxpayers.
Yeah.
And the federal government is apportioning it for different causes. So it doesn't really matter if it's this agency or that.
But if it was allocated, appropriately. I agree. We should be funding, domestic. There's so many things that we should be funding domestically instead of endless wars and contractors and Bibi Netanyahu's urge to stay in power.
Like, Trump is not wrong about it. He said this recently, and I don't disagree with it. Like, we write blank checks for funding for foreign governments, foreign military efforts, and we don't do that for our own people.
And he won't do anything. He already. Newsflash, guys. He already had that opportunity to make a difference when he was president, and he ain't going to do it again. He's not going to fund anything, except his contracts to build high-rise apartments in Dubai or something.
Well, if he can build those with his own money, I don't care about that. I just don't want to use taxpayer dollars for any of it. I just want to write a check back to the American people for the amount they paid in to this stupid system. More Rising right after this.